In honor of Women's History Month and International Women's Day, Acker is thrilled to present our Women in Wine series, available to stream on our Instagram and YouTube channels. So please subscribe to experience all of our incredible content. We have an exciting roster of many wonderful women invigorating the wine industry lined up this month. My name is Lily Mirabel Friedman, and I'm honored to be joined today by a partner, the general manager and beverage director, wow, a lot, of King Restaurant in New York City, Annie Shih. Thank you so much for joining us today, Annie. Where are you joining us from?
From my apartment in New York City. We've had a couple of beautiful days of spring, but unfortunately, I think there's a little bit of snow ahead of us. So the sky's a little downcast today, but all is well.
How are you doing in 2021 so far?
So far, so good. I think in general, the city is really beginning to come back to life, which is amazing to see. I was sitting in traffic in an Uber the other day and I was like, oh, it's just like old times. But it's really wonderful to see everyone out and about this past weekend. And with vaccinations now in the arms of so many, especially like restaurant workers, I do feel like there's been like a collective sigh of relief, and I think it's only going to get better.
There is definitely a glimmer of hope here in New York. So let's keep our fingers crossed that we get past this cold spell and on to bigger, better, springier things. So I think we'll start at the beginning of your life and your career, since so much of our past dictates our future. What was your dream job growing up?
When I was younger, I actually wanted to be a veterinarian. I've always loved animals, I still do. And that was my dream job when I was 8 years old. That obviously has changed. And when I was in high school, college, I loved food and I loved the food world, but I just didn't know what careers were available in the hospitality industry. And I took a very circuitous route here, but yeah, I would say it is nice to be doing something that you love.
You mentioned a circuitous route, and I know that you didn't come directly into food. There were stops along the way. So how and why did you initially decide to get into the wine and restaurant industry?
So it's actually a pretty random story. I was at the time living in London. I was working in finance. I was at JP Morgan, and I really, really wanted to open a restaurant, but had no clue how to get started. So I had, at this particular moment, I was staging on the weekends, actually in the kitchen more often than not, of one of my favorite restaurants in London, called the Clove Club. And I was introduced to my now business partner through a mutual friend, a college and high school friend, a college friend of hers, a high school friend of mine, and my London roommate. And we started doing pop-ups in London together. And then I met our third business partner, Jess, through Claire. They were both working at the River Cafe. And the dream was always to move back to New York to open something. I'm originally from here, so growing up in New York, I felt like I really had a grasp of the real estate and the neighborhood and the location and whatnot. And just the type of food we wanted to do, the idea of a daily changing menu was a way of eating that was pretty common in London, but I don't think had made its way to New York yet. So we all quit our jobs one day and just packed up and moved to New York and did a couple of pop-ups in New York at like friends' houses and whatnot. And then we were looking for real estate. Originally, we were going to just be like a year-long pop-up. That was the plan, because at age 25, you can imagine that a 10-year commercial lease with a personal guarantee was a little intimidating. Not that I had anything to my name, but the thought of committing to that was terrifying. But we looked at a lot of spaces, and it was very obvious that the cost of kind of redoing a space to make it work for a pop-up was not so dissimilar as the cost it would take to open a fully rented 10-year lease restaurant. So we slowly inched our way towards that kind of lease, and it was kind of a wild story how we came upon our current space. I was doing a stage with Victoria James at Peoria, RIP, wonderful neighborhood restaurant. And she was a friend, one of our few and only friends in the industry in New York. And I was walking towards the subway and stopped in at 18 King Street, which was back then called Mekong. A lot of people will know it. It's kind of an institution in New York downtown, like 80s, 90s. And I sat at the bar and was like, oh my God, this is everything we've been looking for, because we had not seen the perfect space and we were very particular about what we wanted. We wanted a corner spot in a charming neighborhood with lots of natural light. We wanted a bar in the front bar room. We wanted an open kitchen and a square dining room, and the ability to have outside tables. So it kind of came to a T. And I got really excited, and I remember calling Claire and Jess afterwards and being like, I literally just sat in our perfect space, except it's a little dingy, but perfect otherwise. And I managed to meet Brian, the owner of Mekong at that time. And he was like, I'm actually renegotiating my lease. By the way, the landlord is a total asshole. But you know, if it doesn't work out in May, I'll let you guys know. And I walked away thinking like, oh my God, May, it's like way too late. Like we were running out of money already and needed to like kind of break ground and start construction and like sign a space. I went in after my second, like another night at Peoria. I went in again, sat at the bar, saw Brian again. He came up to me and was like, I've had it up to here with the landlord. I'm not re-signing my lease. Here's his number. He's going to list the space tomorrow. You should call him. And that's how we found the space, and that's how we opened King. And yeah, that's kind of the very roundabout way that we ended up where we did.
How did you make that transition from back of house, being on the line, to beverage director?
I was never on, that's pushing it. I did have to step up into colds one night as a not knowing anything because someone called out sick, but no, in no way were they allowing me to go near fire. I didn't know what part of restaurants I wanted to be in. I kind of always knew that management operations was something that I just have the natural skill set for. And I think I didn't choose kitchen. It was more like they needed someone to peel potatoes and shave hazelnuts. So like, here you go. I think that was useful just to learn, how a kitchen runs, but beverage was always something that I've loved. I really fell in love with it living in London. It was just the accessibility to wine when you're there is incredible. And I think coming into New York is also like a very practical decision. Like I really did not know a ton about wine or beverages full stop when we opened King. And it was a very steep learning curve, but one that I wanted to take on because I knew it's something I loved. And I think if I had to do it again, I would probably have given myself more time to get up to speed, but it was a very effective way to learn. And I knew I loved both cocktails and spirits and wine. And so it's by far the most satisfying and creative part of the job and something that I love.
Sometimes that crash course way of education works well and
Yeah.
pays off, but sometimes it can certainly be someone's downfall. Was there a pivotal wine you perhaps tasted, whether it was in London or in New York, that made you fall in love with wine itself?
Yeah, in London, I remember this really clearly. It was a bottle of Tom Loub's Matassa, the Vin de France Rouge. And I think back in 2014, like I had no clue what a natural wine was, but I just remember it like kind of made my brain explode. And it was so beautiful. That was definitely one of the most memorable early stage bottles. And I think the best part about wine is that feeling never goes away. Like I still remember the first time I had L'Armande Bernier Rosé de Saignée. I remember the first time I had Simone Bies. I remember the first time I had George Roumier, like all those. I mean, there's so many. And I think the best part about wine is like that keeps happening as you discover more and more.
Definitely. And when you came to kind of stage with Victoria at Fiora, were there any wines that you were seeing get opened that kind of blew your mind?
You know what she actually introduced me to was a wine from Collioure, a red wine from Collioure that just, and I had my first few Corsican producers with her as well. And I think it was kind of, we were tasting in service. I think the Corsican was an Antoine Arena, and I was like, oh my God, this wine, and we tasted a second, and I really want to say that was a Yves Leccia wine. But both of them, I was like, wow, these are incredible. She's like, well, you really should meet her then boyfriend, Lyle Railsback, because there's this incredible importer that brings in fantastic Corsican wines. And Lyle was one of the first people I met in the wine industry and was so generous in sharing knowledge and wine. And both are still very good friends.
And you can, at least to me, you can clearly see the Kermit imprint on your own wine list at King. And I think
yeah, I think really I think as a buyer, you really find that there are certain importers whose tastes really mirror your own palate. Kermit is definitely one of those for us, particularly with our emphasis on Southern France and kind of this very slow kind of Provençal way of eating. Like Sunday lunch is one of our favorite meals that we used to do. So there are definitely a lot of treasures in that book.
There's a perfect synergy there between King and Kermit, I think, in a great way. So
biggest compliment you could have said. So definitely would love to believe that.
So you've certainly, it's a big pivot, I'd say, coming from JP Morgan to a restaurant.
Yeah, it was a tough year.
Other than that kind of very obvious one, what have been the biggest challenges in building your career?
I think for me, it's a little bit different because while I love beverage, it is one component of my job. And I think that's something that a lot of people face is what makes wine incredible is that it's filled with people who just want the geekiest, most in-depth knowledge of very, very niche things. I think, unfortunately, in a restaurant, I think I wish all the time I had the time to just devote myself to wine. Unfortunately, there's a whole lot more that goes into running a restaurant, and I find myself pulled constantly in lots of directions and wishing I had more time to devote to wine itself. But I think that's just the reality of running a restaurant. And I think everyone needs to be a team player, particularly when you belong to such a small team as we do have at King. So I will say a challenge has always been, how do you balance the financials of a restaurant, staffing, front of house service with beverage, wine, and just the general operations of a restaurant. But I think those are the things that are actually very important. Even if you are just running a wine program and focused on that, the financials of that program is a huge marker of success, and also how you train and educate staff. So I'm sure that's a feeling a lot of people can sympathize with. COVID has obviously been a huge, huge challenge, not to state the obvious, but the last year was definitely tough for us. We were just getting to a point where we felt, we were in 2020, we were 3.5 years old. We felt like we were getting to a point where we could start thinking about something else, start having a little bit of a work-life balance again. And then COVID hit and kind of changed all that. So I'm super proud of what the team at King has done. Everyone has been absolutely incredible in how they've pulled through. So absolutely no regrets on that, but definitely not the year that we were expecting to have.
Of course not, I think. And I don't think enough people talk about kind of the background that people should have in terms of the financial savvy to running a wine program. People think about, these are great producers, this is such a great list, but they're not necessarily thinking of the economics that are required to make that sustainable and viable for a restaurant, especially a successful one. So thank you for mentioning that. Did you ever have a mentor, particularly one in the wine business or in the restaurant business more broadly?
I think, the industry is so hospitable. Like, what is amazing about being in restaurants is how friendly and open to sharing everyone you meet is. I have mentioned Victoria. She continues to be always available, always happy to share her time, and any question you might have, she will answer. Jordan Salcido, who I know you guys had on last week, is definitely someone else that has been a huge help and someone I've looked up to. We met very early on because we are opposite Charlie Bird, one of Robert's restaurants, and so became friends quite quickly, and she's fantastic. And those are just two names of many in the wine industry.
Definitely. Well, I bet Jordan will appreciate the shout out. She seems to be this sort of like web that I've built of connecting one person to the next. And it's been a lot of fun to hear people shout each other out. So definitely leaving finance and going into restaurants is a huge risk. Do you generally consider yourself a risk taker?
Yeah, I would say so. I love taking risks. I think it's what makes life fun and interesting. So I would do it all again. Although, obviously it was a lot easier to make that kind of leap when you're younger. And as you put down roots and make a home for yourself and surround yourself with family and friends, it gets a little bit harder. But yes, I do consider myself a risk taker.
Is there another risk that you've taken other than kind of jumping into the restaurant industry?
I think it's a major risk that I've taken in my life. Moving to London was kind of in my earlier 20s, the risk that I wanted to take, because I was living in New York after college and this is where I'm from. And I kind of had this feeling that if I stayed, I would never get a chance to leave again. So, and my parents were very against it. So moving to London was the first. And then that obviously allowed me to meet my business partners today. Since opening King, I can't say I've taken a ton of risks, mostly because I've been working a lot at King. So there hasn't been as much time, but I'm hoping that as things settle down, we kind of carve out more room for ourselves to just think about life beyond.
So particularly in a year like this, how do you stay motivated?
I wish I could say something like eating healthy and exercising a lot. Has not been the case. What keeps me motivated, I think, is the team. I'm motivated by people that are around me. And so a lot of the joy is getting to work with incredible people. Everyone who works at King right now has, on average, been with us for over 2 years. And being able to go to work every day and laugh and be surrounded by your friends, particularly during a time when I think that kind of social gathering or social interaction has been so limited, has been a real blessing. I think it's kept me sane. So definitely that. And just, I think I'm someone who loves challenges. And I would say 2020 was definitely on the extreme side, but I thrive under pressure. So I think it's really allowed us to be more creative in a lot of different ways, whether that's pursuing e-commerce and retail, launching a wine club. Now we do these little weekend windows, and we did bricklette for a long time. We just switched to Harry's bar sandwiches and pear bellinis. It's really allowed us to kind of approach running a restaurant a bit differently and get creative with that.
I want to ask you a little bit for a moment, since you just mentioned you get to work with your friends, and I know your two partners are two women who you're close friends with. What is that like, and what's that dynamic like on a day-to-day basis?
So we have a fourth partner, Sadie, who's also a woman. She's been with us since we opened King, and I It's wonderful. It's very easy. I think sometimes it's too easy. It really does feel like sometimes we're like, wow, we should really like try to like divide up some of these projects so that we're not just all like chatting and working on the same things. But it, I think I'm very, very fortunate in my business partners. For the most part, we have exactly the same vision, which is why I think King works. Like how we want to dine, what we believe food and beverage should do, is very much in line. So we find we're typically in agreement. And the times that we're not, we are able to have a good debate about it and see eye to eye at the end of it. So definitely very lucky.
That's definitely fortunate to say the least.
Yeah.
So what is it that you love about the industry, the wine industry, the restaurant industry?
What I love about the wine industry is kind of the community around it. Like it is just in the nature of wine to share and to sit around a table with friends and to kind of, I don't know, it's one of the highlights of COVID and the lockdown were these late night gatherings of friends and industries outside in the backyard of Popina. And it was just a way for us to decompress and also like just share some like advice and like commiserate in the challenges we were facing and see if anyone had ideas for how to handle things. And I have a wine club pod where we do blind tastings every week. It's just about that sharing of a bottle, and it's completely unpretentious and just a way of kind of coming together. And that's definitely the best part about the wine world, full stop. The industry at large, including the wine industry, people are just so hospitable, and like truly is in the nature of people who choose this life and this career to be generous, open-hearted, kind. And it's been more true this year than ever. So feel very lucky to love what you do. Yeah.
Definitely. What moments stand out when you look back on your success story, personally and for King?
I hardly think of it as a success story. I hope that we have many years ahead. I hope that in 5 more years, we're still going to be on the corner of 18 King Street doing our thing. I think the most important thing in a restaurant is like your last service, and it's unfortunate some nights we're like, God, it's just it never lets up. But I think it's also a chance to like recreate yourself every night. We have a couple of fun projects coming up ahead, which is really exciting, but I don't think we've really paused to think about King as a success, because it still feels like we've just opened it in so many ways. I think we just try to do better and also think ahead and to what is to come, like actually beginning to plan a little bit the future. It's something that we've been wanting to do for many years now, that we haven't been able to do. So I think success for us will be maintaining King and keeping King excited and making sure that people every night still love the restaurant, and then hopefully getting to do something else.
That's very hopeful and I think very honest about where you see yourself, though. I think the New York Times and many other kind of pretty widely known publications have deemed King a great success. So I appreciate your humble nature. I know you're one of my contemporaries age-wise in the industry, but you're certainly a leader in your own right. And I want to ask, what kind of piece of advice would you give this generation or a younger generation of female leaders in the wine industry?
I would say don't be afraid to seek out the experiences that you feel like you need to have in order to make an educated decision. And what I mean by that is, if you're wondering whether or not you want to get into the wine industry, if you're wondering if you want to get into the restaurant industry, think about what what kind of proof or evidence you need to be able to make that decision confidently. And don't be afraid to offer up your time for free, really, to make those experiences happen. Like, take your weekend and be, work at a retail shop, or offer work in a restaurant, even if it's just a restaurant that you really love their wine list, and you start off as a back waiter or whatever it might be. It's just I think it's about taking in as much as you can to make the most informed decision about what you want. So I think that would be the advice I would give.
That's pretty perfect, I think. I know you feature a lot of female winemakers on your wine lists and in your wine club. And I was curious if there was a few specific female winemakers that you'd like to call out so that people take note.
Definitely at the kind of just in the forefront of my mind right now, even though she's not on our list at King because it is only French and Italian. Kathy Corzin is just an incredible person. I admire her so much because she just stuck to her guns and stuck to what she believed her wine should taste like, even when the prevailing trends were against her. She's an incredible farmer. She knows her vines inside and out and cares so much about what is in her soil, especially in a region where I think that's not always typically the case. It's truly remarkable, and her wines are a reflection of that. I would say Dominique Ovette is another wonderful winemaker from Beau de Provence, making fantastic, interesting wines, worth seeking out. Stella Di Compalto, favorite Brunello producer, who doesn't love her wines, just so ethereal and elegant. There are incredible Bees. The list goes on and on and on.
Only we could all get all of those wines all the time. We have our locations. So looking past the jumble that is 2020 and 2021, do you have a vision of what's in store for the future of the wine world?
It's something that we've been talking internally in our team a lot about, what the value of a wine program is. I think what's been really interesting during the pandemic is that you really have seen a convergence of retail and on-premise. I think as so many restaurants have pivoted to selling their wine list retail, or doing a wine club, or even offering kind of bottles to go with their delivery, and they offer at a retail price. I think it's something that we are very conscious of and that we talk about a lot as a team, is what can we offer guests that gives them an experience, that gives them information, kind of like what is the curatorship or the kind of learning moments that we can impart to guests to make it really worthwhile. I think it's about, we talk a lot about how can we get as much good wine to as many glasses as possible. And unfortunately in the West Village, so much of our concern is rent. It's just the cost of doing business in an incredibly expensive neighborhood in New York City. But I think it's more interesting now than it was before, just simply because it's more, I don't know, flexible, permeable. I mean, I'm sure you feel the same way. It's like the relationship between restaurants and auction houses like Acker, retail shops, like it's more intimate than ever before. So it's figuring out what value we can bring our guests while acknowledging that.
It's all very intertwined right now in a way that it at least wasn't outwardly before. We may have had back end sort of deals with restaurants and things like that, but now it's very much, and we're doing this with this restaurant and this person so that we can kind of make everyone known and make it as transparent as possible and try to do the best business we can for everyone, I think. So what are your plans in the year to come as we get past COVID?
God, it is, we have a lot of things kind of in the air. We're working on a cookbook, which we're very excited about, TBD to if and when that ever happens, but we are in the process of writing our proposal. We are working on a new restaurant project for 2022, which is very exciting. It's going to be a completely different kind of restaurant than to King, with a very different wine program. And I think King is just, it's an ever-changing thing. So I think it requires constant love and attention, and just making sure that we're always doing something interesting with the list. Our list at King changes basically every season. So between, what are we now, spring to summer, you'll notice that the list will almost change over completely. So just making sure that those are continue to be a reflection of the best that we can find and something that pairs beautifully with the food, and bring on a little bit of new talent to help us get there. So a lot of exciting things in the works.
Well, you just teased two big projects for you and for King, but is there perhaps a dream project that you'd like to pursue in the future?
Yeah, I think there's been chat about possibly like a tiny little wine bar / cocktail bar upstate. I've been talking for years about doing a Chinese wine bar. So every year on my birthday, I'm like, where in the city can I eat the food I want and drink the wine I want? And it never is quite the perfect marriage of the two. So I keep going on about a wine bar that features fantastic Chinese food. So that's still a dream up in the air, but hopefully something that happens before I retire.
Sign me up, please. I'm someone that has had, I think, my last 3 birthdays at Peking Duck House, BYOB, so that I can have Chinese food in its own iteration, but bring my own wine and bring the wine to here, but with a version of the food that I'd want. So a wine bar that serves Chinese food, excellent Chinese food. Oh, that's what New York City needs.
I think that every year, and then something happens, something like COVID, and I get distracted. But I'm really, really hoping that post 2022, sometime in that range, it's a project that I can actually sink my teeth into.
Well, I look forward to hopefully making it to King this weekend for Bellinis and Harry's sandwiches. And Annie, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you and hear a little bit more about one of today's champions of the New York City restaurant scene. And I cannot thank you enough for sharing your time with us. And thank you so much for celebrating Women's History Month with Acker. So cheers. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.